Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. Time for another show. And what should we start with? Treason? How about it? Why not? We might as well live up to our reputation here of trumpeting those charges. Regardless, don't tell me what the Constitution says. I don't need to know. Nobody needs to know. Nobody's paying attention to it anymore anyway. What's the difference? All right, let's see. Daily Kos Radio being live now, according to Bill anyway. What does he know? I mean, he only knows that we say it's live. He's depending on our word. I think we need a signed affidavit. And really, show me the signature. Daily Kos Radio is live now. True fact. Bill asserts. I have this. This is all about him. I'm going to take his word for it at this one. I now have 5 squirrels who sit on the windowsill and listen to Kagro X every morning. I believe that. By the way, they're totally for impeachment of Trump, not Kagro X. Thanks very much. I'm glad they're not against me. I should be expelled, however. And I'm starting to think that maybe our list needs to grow longer. I wasn't necessarily considering focusing on this morning, but you know how it is. You're sitting there, you're reading Twitter, you're saying, I'm doing a radio show in about 2 minutes. Maybe this doesn't happen to you. Maybe it happens to the squirrels. I don't know. And you say, well, what's going on today? What's of interest? You start reading something and it reminds you of something else, and then something else and something else, and then you say pretty soon, I think I know what I need to do, or at least I need to begin by talking about this. So I pocketed a tweet, which actually kind of, it was a good tweet. I laugh. It is to laugh. I laughed a little bit about it because it started out as a Greg Sargent tweet, praising a George Conway tweet. And George Conway's tweet, I should run back and see if I can find Sargent's tweet. It's just a little bit funny. He says, this is a great thread by George Conway. And the kickoff tweet in the thread is George Conway tweeting a Greg Sargent tweet and saying exactly right about it. So, Greg Sargent, not inhibited in tweeting around tweets of other people saying that he's exactly right. And nor should he be, because he's probably exactly right. But you know how it is with self-promotion. It makes many of us uncomfortable, but not Greg Sargent, I guess, a good thing, too, because he's right. And what the hell does he care? Why not? If it's right, it's right. You should promote it. Promote the hell out of it, I say. He's in the business. Go ahead. And what's he exactly right about? Well, let's see. George Conway says Greg Sargent is exactly right about the following tweet, which reads, Dems are not making one of their best arguments. This would be about Trump. I don't know if you know this. He thinks he's president of the United States, and we got to stop it. Okay. So, but this is a great point and a good place to start off our inquiries today, because there are a million different things in the Mueller report, not yet covered by Mueller, things that were outside of his purview, all of which he could and should be impeached for. But this is a great point. Dems, he says, are not making one of their best arguments, and that is that by obstructing the probe, Trump impeded the inquiry into not just his own conduct, but also into the Russian attack on our political system. Then Greg goes on to quote from scholar Philip Bobbitt on why this might be impeachable. We don't really need to know why it might be. I mean, it is impeachable. Let's not question it. Anything can be impeachable. But more to the point, this is Sargent quoting Philip Bobbitt in one of his columns. Sargent wrote this up already, and now he's re-quoting it for those of us consuming Greg Sargent in tweet form rather than in column form. So here's the screen grab of Greg's longer piece. This is what he took from it. Rather, Trump also sought to derail a full accounting of the Russian attack on our political system, separate and apart, and this is italicized, separate and apart from whether his own campaign conspired with it. This is a very interesting point, and I think the point of his first couple of tweets here is forget or maybe it's George Conway making this point, is forget whether or not, I can't define what collusion is, or there's no legal definition of this or that, or can't prove this or that. There needs to be more focus on what Bobbitt is isolating here. Trump also sought to derail a full accounting of the Russian attack on our political system, separate and apart from whether his own campaign conspired with it. He did this because acknowledging the sabotage would detract from the greatness of his victory, which also led him to fail to marshal a serious response to the next round of interference. Bobbitt, Sargent tells us, explained the relevance of those facts to the impeachment question this way. So that, what I've just read you, was Greg Sargent's summation of Bobbitt. Here's Bobbitt speaking for himself, quoted in the article. The real problem isn't just cooperating with the Russians or just impeding an investigation into that cooperation. It's impeding an investigation to stop a determination of what Russia did, why, and how they did it. Because this is not over. It's going to happen again, not just in our country, in many countries. The exposure of the country to very damaging political intelligence techniques for the venal reason of not diminishing the status of your victory, would that be a high crime and misdemeanor? It certainly would. And that's Greg Sargent's quote of Bobbitt in his article and the point he was trying to make. Now, George Conway takes off with this thing in saying, well, this is exactly right. Greg Sargent and his article and Bobbitt and his point and Greg's summation of the point. Then goes on to riff on it and says, in fact, George Conway continues, it's why Trump's misconduct is worse than his misconduct, or than the misconduct that led to Nixon's resignation. And he includes here, what is this screen grab from? This, from his own, I guess, opinion column of April 18th. You might recall his piece, his op-ed, Trump is a cancer on the presidency, Congress should remove him. So here's George quoting himself, saying, as for Trump's supposed defense that there was no underlying collusion crime, well, as the special counsel points out, it's not a defense, even in a criminal prosecution. But it's actually unhelpful in the comparison to Watergate. The underlying crime in Watergate was a clumsy third-rate burglary in an election campaign that turned out to be a landslide. The investigation that Trump tried to interfere with here, to protect his own personal interests, was in significant part an investigation of how a hostile foreign power interfered with our democracy. If that's not putting personal interests above presidential duty to the nation, nothing is. Good point. He continues to make some more good points. Put another way, a president takes an oath in which he solemnly swears to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Here, in attempting to subvert the investigation into Russia's effort to interfere with our electoral process, Trump violated that oath and put his own vanity and self-interest above that of the nation and the people whose laws and constitution he swore to faithfully execute and uphold. Not that he knew what that meant, but okay. If that's not impeachable, nothing is. True also. George continues, this is a simple point, and it doesn't turn on the kaleidoscopic meaning of collusion or the criminal law technicalities of obstruction. It goes to something very fundamental. Do we have a president who is loyal to this country, or loyal only to himself? When you put the question that way, and the object of the question is Donald J. Trump, now that we know all that we know about him, and have seen all that we have seen, there can only be one answer. And for the framers of our Constitution, if you posed to them the question of whether the impeachment clause was directed at public officials who placed their own selfish interests above those of the nation's, they would have said yes. That's exactly what we had in mind. For them, the case of Donald J. Trump would have been an easy one. It should be an easy one for us as well. All true, all all correct, all well said. And I guess that's the reason Greg Sargent was pointing to. It wasn't because, I don't really think, because it started off by saying that Greg himself was actually exactly right, but rather that he was making his own very salient independent points. Now, to head back to the top of it here, where Greg Sargent is summing things up and saying, by obstructing the probe, Trump impeded the inquiry into not just his conduct, but also into the Russian attack on our political system, and why Philip Bobbitt thinks it's important. And Bobbitt points out it's impeding an investigation to stop a determination of what Russia did, why, and how they did it, because this is not over. It's going to happen again, not just in our country, in many countries. How do we know this is true? And the answer is because it already has happened, not only in our country, but in many countries. And this is the again. 2016 was the again. And of course, 2020 will perhaps likely be an again. But 2016 wasn't the first instance. It's not about it happening again. This was a repeat play. How do we know? And the answer is the Republican congressional leadership told us they knew that that was the case. And then swore themselves to secrecy about it because it was their determination that it was better for them too, politically, better for their own personal interests to just shut up about it and not say anything. Republicans would likely win the White House and take control of Washington and have their way with it. Now, they thought that Russian interference was good for the Republican Party. Of course, Russians probably thought, this is amazing all by itself, that after all this time, it would be best for Russia if Republicans ran Washington, D.C., because they were the most likely to destroy the United States from the inside on their behalf. I don't know that they would have thought the same thing in years past, but they do now. So what am I talking about? I am talking, of course, about the revelation that came to us when. I guess I'll have to trace down the provenance of all of this just so I can get the dates right. Back in May of 2017, when Adam Entus ran the story in the Washington Post under the headline, House Majority Leader to Colleagues in 2016, I think Putin pays Trump. Everyone remembers that, of course. We all saw that, and everybody said, oh my God, that's amazing that he said such a thing. And then, of course, ran with the explanation that they all laughed at the end, so he must have been joking, so therefore look away. And we just kind of never really went back to it. And the highlight clip that goes, the clip that went on, that made into the highlight reel from this conversation was, I think Putin pays Trump, swear to God, ha 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 ha. No, seriously, let's all keep that a secret. But that wasn't all that was being kept secret. I mean, it wasn't kept secret. It was caught on tape. But again, let me just sort of set this up with the Philip Bobbitt line. Impeding an investigation to stop a determination of what Russia did is the big problem here. Why and how they did it? Because this is not over. It's going to happen again, not just in our country, in many countries. So let's go to the audio tape, if you will. I've pulled up the transcript of the conversation among the Republican leaders that was obtained by the Post. And let's read through it, shall we? We should, because that's the headline of the piece linked in Adam Entus's piece, where you get a chance to read the whole transcript. In fact, the headline is, Read the transcript of the conversation among GOP leaders obtained by the Post. The conversation provides a glimpse at the internal views of GOP leaders who now find themselves under mounting pressure over the conduct of President Trump. The exchange, which was obtained by the Washington Post, shows that the Republican leadership in the House privately discussed Russia's involvement in the 2016 election, and more, by the way, and Trump's relationship to Putin, but wanted to keep their concerns secret. House Majority, and this is now referring back to the original article. House Majority Leader to colleagues in 2016, I think Putin pays Trump. The transcript begins thus: an unidentified individual begins by speaking and saying, Kevin McCarthy, that is, had the Ukrainian prime minister this morning. And Paul Ryan answers, oh, so did I. I just left him in the healthcare something unintelligible. We've read this transcript before on the air, but it's time to read it again. The unidentified individual says, okay. Ryan continues and says, this guy's a good guy. Deep thought. There's some crosstalk. Ryan then continues, this guy's a pretty good guy. Now, Rogers. Now, who are we talking about here? Rogers. Are we saying, is this Mike Rogers? Is it Kathy McMorris Rogers? Is that, do I have the names right here? Let me just check this out. And see, do they both spell their name the same way? Maybe not. Let's see. So where are we here? Let's see. Kathy McMorris, because I mean, yeah, so she's with the D, Kathy McMorris Rogers. I assume it's her in this discussion because it's a leadership discussion, and I think she's a member of the leadership. But isn't there another Rogers, or wasn't there, in Congress at the time? Do I have that wrong? Oh, well, Congressman Rogers, Mike Rogers was no D in his name, R-O-G, and Hal Rogers also, R-O-G-E-R. So I guess it is Kathy McMorris Rogers. Just wanted to be sure about that. So Ryan is busying himself by talking about the Ukrainian prime minister. What do you think of the Ukrainian prime minister, Mr. Wonk, Mr. Smart Guy, Mr. Budget Amazingness? He's a pretty good guy. He's a pretty good guy. Yeah, okay, fine. Thanks for your in-depth analysis. Anyway, Rogers says, is this the guy who's been there a while? Ryan says, no, he's new. He was the speaker of the unintelligible, and I assume the speaker of the legislature, whatever, one, or I don't know how many houses the legislature has in Ukraine or what they call it, but okay. Rogers says their other prime minister got kicked out, right? Super intelligent discussion here, but Ryan, right, this guy's like the anti-corruption guy. This guy's there because he's the anti-corruption guy. He was the speaker. So, whatever. Super brainy. Rogers says, okay. Ryan continues. And he's the one who was working on the amendments to the Constitution. Unintelligible something. Independent judiciary. Rogers, okay. Ryan, they got that in now. Unintelligible. And he's passing all these anti-corruption laws. Rogers, how are things going in Ukraine? Ryan says, what's that? Rogers says, how are things going in Ukraine? You deaf son of a... Whatever. Anyway, Ryan says, well, the Russians are bombing them 30 to 40 shells a day, and the people, Crimea is gone, and they're trying to clean up their government to show that they want to be Western. So they're trying to prove to the Western world that they want to be Western or Westernizing so they can get support to get their country back. They're unintelligible. Everybody talks a good game on what they're doing, but he's passed all these anti-corruption laws. The question is, are they, executing? Unintelligible. I think by the summer, they'll have it all done. Rogers asks, did he talk about their economy? She might be the smartest one in the room here. Ryan, yeah, this is about getting actual growth and not graft growth. So, no, it's not good, but Rogers, I went there a year ago. It was like, wow. Not that smart, but okay. It was like, wow, these people are living, they're on the front lines. They're fighting for their freedom. It's their independence. Ryan says he has this really interesting riff about people have said that they have Ukraine fatigue, and it's really Russian fatigue, because what Russia is doing to us, financing our populists, financing people in our governments to undo our governments, messing with our oil and gas energy, all the things Russia does to basically blow up our country, they're just going to roll right through us and go to the Baltics and everyone else. That's a pretty bold statement right there. This is the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, says he just met with the Ukrainian Prime Minister and he has learned that the Russians have been manipulating politics in Ukraine for some time and that they are financing their populists. They're financing people in our governments to undo our government. Messing with their oil and gas energy, all the things Russia basically does to blow up our country, and that they're not only going to do it to them, but they're going to go right through and do it to the Baltic states and everyone else. And Rogers says, does she agree with this or not? She says, yes. So here's Paul Ryan saying, I've just learned what the Russians are up to, or this has reconfirmed my knowledge of what the Russians are up to. I don't know. The Ukrainian Prime Minister just told me the Russians make a habit, have a full active program of interfering in Ukraine's elections and interfering with Ukraine's political structure, top to bottom, financing so-called populists, messing with their energy production, and that this is, and as they say, financing people in our governments to undo our governments, and that this is happening in Ukraine and will happen all over Eastern Europe. And Kathy McMorris Rogers says, yes. Ryan then continues, so we should not have Ukraine fatigue. We should have Russian fatigue. Rogers, yes, the propaganda. My big takeaway from that trip was just how sophisticated the propaganda. Ryan says, it's very sophisticated. Again, super smart. Rogers, just how sophisticated the propaganda coming out of Russia and Putin. Ryan, very sophisticated. Crosstalk. And then now Rogers says, not just in Ukraine. They were once funding the NGOs in Europe. They attacked fracking. I remember when we first wrote this, I was amazed by this. The thing that really worried her was that they were spending their money attacking fracking. Like, oh no, I love fracking. They're fighting for their independence, but then fracking. So she's on alert because fracking is in danger. All right, whatever it takes. But again, they're funding NGOs in Europe, right? Once again, finding fault lines throughout the Western world and exploiting them. And no wonder they attacked fracking. Well, for one thing, of course, Russia produces lots of oil and gas itself. And to the extent that the rest of Europe can produce their own through fracking, it just cuts into their profits. But what they're probably also talking about here, whether they understand it or not, is the Russians probably found fault lines in Western European countries where I would imagine the analog of the more progressive liberal wing of politics here acting there, saying, I don't know if I like all this fracking. It may be that it is environmentally damaging all by itself. Plus, of course, it just keeps us addicted to fossil fuels, which is bad for climate change, etc. And for 1,000 reasons, we are concerned about and oppose fracking, whereas perhaps the governments there may say, well, to kind of promote a little bit of energy independence and get us away from having to deal with the Russians for oil and gas all the time, perhaps we really, should sacrifice some amount of environmental damage or even health damage to gain some economic independence in the energy sector from the Russians. And I'm sure that's a contentious issue, and the Russians probably know it, and they probably play it up and provoke the left-leaning and environmentally concerned voters of Europe against their own governments with inflammatory propaganda about that fracking. And, they may be telling just the plain truth about the damage fracking can do, and that should be enough. But they may also be exaggerating things, or exaggerating perhaps the role that certain politicians are playing in promoting fracking so that they come under attack from left-leaning elements of the body politic in those countries, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, let's get back to the transcript here. So, Rogers acknowledging not just in Ukraine. They were once funding NGOs in Europe. They attacked fracking. Ryan says, correct. Rogers continues, Russia TV. I was not, I hadn't tuned in to Russian TV until that trip. It's frightening. Ryan then says, so he's saying they're doing this throughout Europe. So, and then some unintelligible mix. But there's Speaker Ryan saying, this Ukrainian guy, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's doing all this anti-corruption stuff. He used to be the speaker, like me. And he's saying they're doing this throughout Europe. That, for those of you not familiar with the map, it means a lot of countries, probably, throughout Europe. Ryan then continues, this isn't just about Ukraine. Yeah. Rogers. So yeah, it's, unintelligible. It's really a messaging. You know, it's a propaganda war. Yeah, it is. Ryan says, Russia is trying to turn Ukraine against itself. By the way, you could just substitute USA for that as well, but okay. Rogers continues, yes, and it's sophisticated, and it's, Ryan answers, maniacal. Rogers, yes. Ryan, and guess who's the only one taking a stand against it? We are. Amazing. We aren't, though, of course. And Rogers knows it. We're not. But we're not. Now in chimes McCarthy. I'll guarantee. It's in caps here in the transcript, which is a pretty amazing thing to say. I'll guarantee you that's what it is. Then more unintelligible crosstalk. McCarthy says the Russians hacked the DNC and got the Oppo research that they had on Trump. That's what he thinks happened, that had just broken in the news the day before. McCarthy then laughs. There's more crosstalk. And Ryan says, the Russians hacked the DNC. Patrick McHenry then says, to get Oppo. Ryan says, on Trump, and deliver it to, who? Well, that was one theory, and that's not the end of the transcript either. We'll come back and continue along with it and remind you of what the hell this thing means after this break, this well-timed break. Amazing. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. So, when we last left off, we were just getting to the part that everybody thinks this transcript is famous for, which is, of course, Kevin McCarthy's pronouncement about Putin paying Trump. But we hadn't, that wasn't what we were here for. We were here instead for the proof that Republican House leadership knew very well, and we know how they knew very well that the Russians were in the business of essentially hacking elections throughout the West, and that they were aware of this, but then they decided to keep it to themselves. It's a very strange thing to do for people who are supposed to be patriotic and defending the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so where were we? First, they needed to do a little bit of theorizing between themselves, in which McCarthy supposes that the Russians hacked the DNC to get Oppo research that they had on Trump. That's an interesting theory. And then the idea, it gets developed further. Paul Ryan says, so the Russians hacked the DNC, McHenry says, to get Oppo. Ryan says, on Trump, and delivered it to who? And then McCarthy chimes in. There's 2 people, I think, Putin pays. Rohrabacher and Trump. And then there's laughter. After which he says, swear to God, which is an awfully serious thing to say. Though, sometimes people do take the name in vain, let's say. Ryan then says, of course, this is an off-the-record laughter. No leaks. Laughter, all right? And then more laughter. Ryan says, this is how we know we're a real family here. Scalise chimes in, that's how you know that we're tight. Laughter. Ryan, what's said in the family stays in the family. And that's the end of the transcript. And everybody thought that the most amazing part was the part at the end, or the part where McCarthy says, swear to God, I think Putin pays Trump. And those are important things, no doubt. The swearing everybody to secrecy is certainly very important. I just think it's amazing. And I want to remind everybody, I know you never forgot, but I want to remind everybody that what we're saying here, which is the Republican House leadership knew very well what the Russians were up to and decided to do nothing about it, and have decided to do nothing since, and are now in the business, Ryan being gone from the House, and McCarthy now being the top-ranking Republican in the House, now in the business of defending Trump. I swear to God, I think Putin pays Trump. Listen to all the maniacal goings-on as between the Russians and emerging Eastern European democracies who are trying to westernize. We ought to be, as Republicans, you would think they would have been strongly opposed to all of this. And this is why they were meeting with the Ukrainian prime minister, that they came away from that meeting with an understanding of how maniacal the Russians were really being, and then ended the meeting by saying, yeah, but let's let it happen, at least here in the United States, because I think Republicans ostensibly will win control of the White House and retain control of both houses of Congress. So let's do nothing, and let's make sure no one finds out that we are on to what the Russians are doing, because then they'll be upset with us. Why didn't you do something about this if the Russians were up to this? And the answer, unfortunately, for us is because they were doing it in a way that would leave us as the victors. And we were cool with that. Whether it was collusion or not is perhaps a different question, an important one. Did they say, well, they're helping us, so we're accepting the help? Or are they saying we're the beneficiaries of their interference, so we'll do nothing? That may be the only question that really controls on whether or not there was collusion per se. But the whole argument that kicked this thing off, the discussion as between Greg Sargent and George Conway and who was the last one? Let me flip back so I get it right here. Philip Bobbitt. As between these three guys, the agreement is this is collusion not necessary to get to that question before you hit a gigantic impeachable problem. If you stand by and allow yourself to be the beneficiary of a foreign power's attack on your country, its democracy, its electoral system, that's enough. That serves just fine as an impeachable crime. As a matter of fact, it serves just fine as treason, if you ask me. But okay, you want to get technical about things. Certainly the question of whether or not it's impeachable is answerable. Yes, it is. Did you help? Did you talk to them? Did you encourage them? Did you say this is going great? This is how you could make your effort even more effective? Well, that much we're not 100% sure, perhaps, although there is evidence that Paul Manafort did everything he could to feed them data that would enable them to make their efforts more efficient. That's collusion. Is it Donald Trump directing him to do so? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't even know how much evidence there really is of that. But again, I mean, Conway and Sargent and Bobbitt put it pretty plainly. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Standing by and accepting the results when you know what's generating those results is impeachable all by itself. A crime of omission, if you will. You can put it that way if you want that kind of framing of it. All right. Well, just wanted to let you know what we were up against. But yeah, you should all reread that transcript, share it around. We only have so much juice here using Twitter to do it. But, maybe it's something that Greg Sargent will take note of once again, since we've attached it to his discussion. And maybe he'll highlight it and take it a little bit further. Okay. There are other stories developing this morning, starting with the alert that I got from, that we all got on Twitter. A tweet from Jeff Stein, who tweets as Spy Talker, and who, by way of bio, a Newsweek national security correspondent and Spy Talk columnist. I don't know what Spy Talk, is that his column in Newsweek? I don't know. Anyway, point is, he tweeted this morning, White House has instructed former security clearances director Carl Klein, the guy who either passed along Trump's direct orders or issued his own, to allow Jared Kushner and other questionable individuals to get their security clearances when the security apparatus very clearly insisted that they not get them. Carl Klein is instructed by the White House not to appear before the House Government Oversight Committee. So, a little bit more clarification came in shortly thereafter, and then an article that explains it all. Laura Bassett tweeted this additional piece. Let's see. This one accompanied by a document. New showdown brewing. White House instructs Carl Klein, who greenlit Kushner's security clearance, not to comply with Congress's subpoena. Klein's attorneys say, or Klein's attorney anyway, singular, says he's listening to the White House over Congress and will not testify. And there are some screenshots of the letter here. So let's take a quick look and see if we can figure out what's up. This is a letter to Elijah Cummings, chair of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And let's see, I guess this is counsel for Carl Klein here. Robert Driscoll, on behalf of the firm McGlinchey Stafford, counsel for Mr. Klein, who answers, I apologize, dear Chairman Cummings, I apologize for this late notice. I don't know when he was scheduled to appear, but perhaps the article will tell us. However, per the attached letter, my client has been instructed not to appear tomorrow. With two masters from two co-equal branches or two equal branches of government, we will follow the instructions of the one that employs him. Although it doesn't employ him, or is he in a different branch, a different part of the federal government now? I thought he was former. Maybe he's still working for the federal government elsewhere. I hope you can appreciate the situation we are in. This decision is not made lightly and does not come from any ill will or deliberate defiance on my part or that of my client. We wished to answer the legitimate legislative questions of this committee, but warned of an impending conflict. We have done our best to avoid it by entreating this committee to consider withdrawing the subpoena in substitution of compulsory process for the White House records. But the impasse has now hardened and as previously stated, the weighty constitutional issues at stake and controlling decisional law referenced, see, e.g., letter from Michael M. Parpura, Deputy Counsel to Chairman Elijah Cummings, dated April 18th, 2019. In other words, the issues are significant, and my client is truly not a party in interest. It is my sincere hope that this inter-branch dispute can be worked out. If so, we will properly and eagerly arrange a time with committee staff for his voluntary appearance. Thank you for your understanding. And then it is signed. And, by the way, a copy to Jim Jordan, because he's super honest and has lots of integrity. All right, let's see. There is, I guess, they've attached the letter from Michael Purpura, the deputy counsel to the president, directing Mr. Driscoll to direct his client not to appear. I don't know whether we're better off reading the letters or not, but I guess now that I've told you I have that source material, keen on reading it. But let's skip over to the Washington Post's coverage of it. Help distill the issues for radio consumption. White House instructs official to ignore Democratic subpoena. Oh no. Over security clearances. Here it comes. Tom Hamburger, the reporter on this one, a former White House personnel security director, has been instructed by the White House not to show up Tuesday, that would be today, for questioning by the House Oversight Committee. The move appears to be the latest effort by the Trump administration to push back against congressional inquiries targeting the White House, which have proliferated since Democrats took control of the House in January. White House Deputy Counsel Michael M. Purpura, I don't know how he actually pronounces that. I'm giving him. It could be Purpura for all I know. Anyway, he wrote a letter on Monday asking the former security director, Carl Klein, not to show up as the committee had requested. Klein is now working at the Defense Department. All right, so at least he's still an executive branch federal employee. In a letter to Klein's lawyer obtained by the Washington Post, Purpura wrote that a committee subpoena asking Klein to appear, quote, unconstitutionally encroaches on fundamental executive branch interests, unquote. In a separate letter Monday, Klein's attorney, Robert Driscoll, told the panel that his client would adhere to the White House recommendation. And this, the passage we read earlier. With two masters from two equal branches of government, we will follow the instructions of the one that employs him. Cummings was not available for comment late Monday night. He signed a subpoena earlier this month for Klein to appear Tuesday. That subpoena followed testimony from a White House personnel security whistleblower, Tricia Newbold, who alleged that the White House had been recklessly granting security clearances to individuals whom lower-level administration personnel staff had found unworthy. Newbold, who processed security clearances under Klein at the White House for the first 2 years of the administration, told Cummings' panel that more than 24 denials for security clearances had been overturned during the Trump administration. She said that Congress was her last hope for addressing what she considered to be improper conduct that left the nation's secrets exposed. Newbold, an 18-year veteran of the security clearance process who has served under both Republican and Democratic presidents, said she warned her superiors that clearances, quote, were not always adjudicated in the best interest of national security, unquote, which is really how they ought to be adjudicated, don't you think? And that she faced retaliation for doing so. Among those whose clearances she questioned was presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner, who President Trump ultimately demanded be granted a permanent top-secret clearance, despite the concerns of intelligence officials. Kushner was identified only as, quote, senior White House official 1, always problematic when you're designated with a number like that, in committee documents released during the first week in April following Newbold's testimony. Seems like a year ago, doesn't it? In her deposition, Newbold said her staff determined that official 1 had too many, quote, significant disqualifying factors, unquote, to receive a clearance. However, that recommendation was overruled by Klein, the career official who then headed the office, according to Newbold's interview with committee staff. While Kushner's security clearance was pending, he held an interim top-secret clearance that at one point also gave him access to some of the government's most sensitive materials, including the president's daily intelligence brief, the PDB, that the Post had reported. Last February, his clearance was reduced to secret as part of an effort by Kelly, who I don't think they've mentioned so far in this story, but we're talking about former White House Chief of Staff Kelly. An effort by Kelly to limit the number of White House officials with permanent clearances who had access to highly classified material. Trump then personally directed Kelly to give Kushner a top-secret clearance, a move that made Kelly so uncomfortable that he documented the request in writing. Beware of people who take notes, everybody. He documented the request in writing, according to people familiar with the situation. The letters from the White House and Klein's lawyer came late Monday, following a day that began with another confrontation with Congress. Earlier on Monday, the Trump Organization filed a lawsuit, we mentioned this, to prevent an accounting firm from complying with a committee subpoena for 8 years' worth of Trump's financial records. In a statement issued earlier this month, Jim Jordan of Ohio, the top Republican on the House, and the one I think so far as I know the most experienced in allowing his the young men under his charge as wrestling coach to be sexually abused. Kind of weird. Anyway, the top Republican on the House Oversight Committee now accused Cummings of politicizing the security clearance issue. Of course, sure. One that he said should be bipartisan, and it should be. They should all be worried about the fact that they're handing out security clearances to unqualified hacks who happen to be members of the president's family, but they're not. So what are you going to do? It's very Orwellian watching them say, you should not be investigating this. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be bipartisan. And our party wants to not look, and your party wants to look. We should have bipartisan agreement. And since we're never going to agree to look, you who want to look should agree not to look so that you can be bipartisan. That's all that's happening here. Chairman Cummings' investigation is not about restoring integrity to the security clearance process. It is an excuse to go fishing through the personnel files of dedicated public servants, Jordan said. And of course, here we're talking about the personal files of Jared Kushner, who is not a dedicated public servant. He never has been. He has got no record of being a dedicated public servant, obviously. And despite the fact that he now holds a position in the White House, he's still not a public servant. He's a personal servant to himself, of course. Republicans said Cummings' cherry-picked excerpts of the closed-door interview with Newbold, whom they characterized as a disgruntled employee with limited knowledge of how security clearance decisions are actually made. Just 18 years worth of, personal experience with him. Nothing to be, nothing serious, I guess is what we're saying. All right, so there we are. Very interesting. The second subpoena defied in a week. So, let's just let the voters decide, I guess, is basically where we're going to come down on this one. Okay, let's see. Speaking of stuff, just to be eloquent about it, that has sprung from the Mueller report, I think we all saw Donald Trump on video insisting in answer to a reporter's question about the tidbit from the Mueller report about people ignoring his orders that they knew were either illegal or ill-advised in some way. And, of course, he can't countenance that. So, of course, he tells the reporter, nobody disobeys my orders. Right? Nobody disobeys my orders. Or people die, right? He's thinking of a few good men. But apparently everybody does all the time. And more information about Trump ordering people to do illegal things. We can, I guess, add this to Garant's Frank Ruta's list from the other day. This time, profile and courage here from, not really, Rex Tillerson, who, like a year after getting his ass handed to him, I'm looking at another picture. He lets everyone know, oh, yeah, by the way, he ordered me to do illegal things too. Thanks for letting us know. I guess thanks for not executing those illegal orders, but, you might have spoken up. Anyway, let's take a look at this one from The Independent over in the UK. See if we can open up the original here. Rex Tillerson says Trump, oh my, all right, here we are. Says Trump asked him to do illegal things as Secretary of State. Former Secretary of State was removed from his post in March after a contentious year serving the U.S. president. Clark Minduck reports from New York for The Independent here. Let's just see if we can get a flavor of what sorts of things he was asking. Former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said he frequently had to push back on requests from Donald Trump that he said would have violated the law. Mr. Tillerson described the give and take he had with the president during rare public remarks on Thursday in Houston, where he attended a fundraiser for the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So often, the president would say here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I would have to say to him, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law, Mr. Tillerson said, according to the Houston Chronicle. So far, not that specific. I'd say, here's what we can do. We can go back to Congress and get this law changed. And if that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. I told him, I'm ready to go up there and fight the fight if that's what you want to do, he added. During those conversations, the president would grow frustrated, Mr. Tillerson said. Mr. Tillerson was removed from his position in March after over a year serving under a president with whom he had a well-known contentious relationship with. All right. Editor missed that one. He was replaced as Secretary of State by Mike Pompeo. Mr. Tillerson, a former CEO for ExxonMobil, said he believes Mr. Trump will win re-election because the public is not engaged on many important issues facing the United States. Is he saying that he would oppose Trump winning re-election? How interesting. I will be honest with you, it troubles me that the American people seem to want to know so little about issues that they are satisfied with 128 characters. Oh, come on, it hasn't been 128 for a while, right? Mr. Tillerson said, referring to Twitter, which the president uses frequently. I don't want that to come across as a criticism of him. No, he added, it's really a concern that I have about us as Americans and us as a society and us as citizens. Thanks a lot. Mr. Tillerson has largely stayed out of the spotlight since leaving public office earlier this year. Well, we really could have, I guess we could have used that information a little bit earlier, and maybe he gave information about illegal orders to Mueller. He certainly didn't give us any here, but I don't know. If he's avoiding the spotlight, this seems like an awfully stupid way to continue to do that because it's actually the opposite. All right, so no real details there, but maybe he needs to be questioned as well. Let's see. I thought I did put this aside just so that we could be up to speed on Sri Lanka, the numbers climbing in terms of casualties from attacks in Sri Lanka. I know we haven't made much mention of it. It's outside the usual purview of the show. I mean, insofar as it is discussing happenings in, well, you know, I mean, we do from time to time discuss happenings in other countries, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, it's almost like, well, terrorist attack abroad doesn't even get noticed anymore. But, of course, this one particularly egregious. And now it turns out that I guess an Islamic State-linked group is claiming responsibility for the bombings, but no evidence so far provided that they actually did it. But it's, you know, just the sort of thing you were hoping never to see, because apparently part of the messaging was that the attack was claimed to be in retaliation for the attack on the mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. Why launch the revenge attack in Sri Lanka? The answer is probably no, that's not why the attacks were perpetrated. Or it was, well, this is just a target of convenience for somebody who was angry about that shooting, and you know, that's about it. I mean, as far as direct retaliation for it goes, you would think that might, I don't want to wish that it happens anywhere, and I don't want to visit more violence on the New Zealanders here, but you would think that it would bear some closer relation. But then again, I guess if you are an Islamic State terrorist zealot looking for logic from you that's that robust and directly connected to reality is probably a fruitless task, let's say. But I did want to note that, you know, how serious the toll has become and how complicated the international picture could become as a result of this thing, which, of course, is exactly their hope, that there would be renewed focus on the Islamic State and that there would be this acceptance of the idea that there was some sort of trade in revenge going on here, and whether it was really motivated by that or not, it would be in their interest to make people think so. which we probably ought not to give in to very easily, especially if there's some chance that it's just not true. So, I don't know. I pass on this note by way of perhaps inoculation here. Perhaps we can cast a jaundiced eye on the claims here and let people have time to work out what they think happened among the law enforcement authorities in Sri Lanka instead. All right. Well, let's see. In the last day or so, we also have the report back to domestic news and back to the Trump situation that Kamala Harris now has spoken up and says that Congress should take steps anyway toward impeaching Trump. This is, I guess, something they'll be now asking all of the Democratic presidential contenders, and I think it's a good thing to do. This time it was Harris. She said on Monday that the House should take steps towards impeaching Trump, saying she believes that Special Counsel Mueller's report revealed evidence of obstruction of justice. I like the other argument, but yes, this is true. We have a very good reason to believe. We have very good reason to believe that there is an investigation that has been conducted. Of course we do. We saw it. Which has produced evidence that tells us that this president and his administration engaged in obstruction of justice. I believe Congress should take steps towards impeachment, Harris said at a CNN town hall in New Hampshire. Credit for it, of course. I'm glad she did it. I don't mean to belittle it. Off the cuff answers for things this complicated are never great. This one was a little fumbling, I guess, but no worse than anything I've done here with reporting it to you here today. But maybe that's better. Maybe that's more genuine feeling. Anyway, it's a little bit of beating around the bush to say. What did you say? We believe there's good reason to believe there's been an investigation that has been conducted. Okay, I know. I get where you're going with it. I'm still okay. Don't worry about it. It's not disqualifying. I'm still with you. Okay, we'll be right back after 1 minute, which means that we'll be back in a minute. See? Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's jump on down the list a little further here and see what else we've got. I put this one aside, and this an interesting story that harkens back to something we mentioned yesterday. And I'm trying to see, did I have a story on that I just briefly mentioned, I guess, after reading about the Eric Prince Seychelles meeting, which we really should probably continue with and discuss a little bit more. The fact that Maria Butina is back in the news. Her case continues, and I guess she's back in court and facing some charges that may land her not a great deal of jail time. I think it was 18 months being discussed. I'm pretty sure I had an article about it, and it is now not immediately obvious to me where that might have gone to. Let's see. I'm just going to scan, but perhaps it'll pop up a little bit later. It's not. I thought that I had it handy yesterday, and maybe I'll check yesterday's summary for it. I may have filed this over in the archives instead. But let me begin this then by bringing this tweet that I stored up as a tweet thread from Andrew S. Weiss, who, conveniently enough, tweets as Andrew S. Weiss on Twitter. Vice President for Studies, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Russia and Eurasia Program. So that's his area of specialty. I guess it's interesting. Vice President for Studies. That's really a title? Okay. Well, all right. I'll take a quick look. Oh, by the way, before I go to that, I just saw a note flash across Twitter from Mark Sumner. I think he's commenting on the article we finished reading a little while ago about the defiance of the subpoena I just want to clarify that by clicking through to his link, but it's taking an awful long time to get to. But he was pointing up a problem, which I guess I didn't notice. But the problem, he says, with this Washington Post story is right there in the title. This is, and was it finally opened yet? No, of course not. But let me take a look back at the one that we looked at and see if that's the one. Yes, this is it. White House instructs official to ignore Democratic subpoena over security clearances. This I didn't even register with me, but Mark's right. The problem with it is in the title. This is not a Democratic subpoena. This is a congressional subpoena for a witness on a matter of national security. A good point, and I'm glad he brought it up. I'm sorry I missed it the first time. And then, of course, I immediately scrolled past that thing so that I couldn't find it and provide it to you. But I don't know. Do you need to see Mark's tweet on it? He said it. You heard it. Point granted. Okay. Now, back to Andrew S. Weiss, our Vice President for Studies, in case you wanted to study anything, over at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Want to study international peace? Talk to Andrew Weiss. He's the Vice President for Studies. I really don't know what that's supposed to mean. But luckily, much clearer and more interesting is his thread beginning this way. The Mueller report, perhaps you've heard of it. The Mueller report is conspicuously silent on the harm to U.S. national security from the Trump team's dalliances with Russian emissaries during 2015 through 2017. But a little noticed DOJ filing last Friday sheds light on Mueller's ongoing counterintelligence, or CI, investigation. And I believe that filing was, in fact, in the Maria Butina case. In fact, he says so. And I'm really not sure where my original article on that thing went, but I'll see if I can't dig it up. Anyway, Andrew says, on April 19th, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office and the DOJ's National Security Division submitted a sentencing memorandum in the Maria Butina case. It is attached here as a document cloud document. I don't think we're going to need to read all the way through it. It spells out, he tells us, in stark terms, why Butina posed a threat to U.S. national security with a heavy focus on three types of intelligence activities. Access agents, that's one. Spot and assess operations, and thirdly, back-channel lines of communication. The Trump people are obsessed with back-channel lines of communications. It's very interesting. Let's see. Greg Sargent on about yet something new here, so I thought I might, let's see if we can click through and open that up for later. All right. Continuing with Andrew Weiss. So we have our access agents, three types of intelligence activities. Access agents, spot and assess operations, and back-channel lines of communication. Curiously, few people have picked up on an addendum to the filing, the Butina filing, written by the former head of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, Robert Anderson. It's easy enough to extrapolate from Anderson some elements of the CI assessment that is a central part to Mueller's inquiry. Robert Anderson, whose declaration appears on pages 24 through 28, is no run-of-the-mill figure. And there is, what is this? Back to another link to the sentencing memorandum here. By way of proof, although we've already seen it earlier. Anderson worked on many of the Bureau's most prominent counterintelligence cases of the past 20 years, and he includes a screenshot of his bio from the FBI webpage. He is a surprisingly visible figure who criticized the Trump team's, quote, calculated, brutal attacks on Mueller, the FBI, and the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement communities, which he described as, quote, unfair, unwise, and disgusting, unquote, in a 2018 op-ed. And that is attached here, I guess. He chose some outlet for it. DelawareOnline.com. That may be just, I don't know whether he published it in the Washington Post and it was syndicated elsewhere and he just happened to grab it from Delaware Online. But if that was the originating source of it, no disrespect to Delaware or Delaware Online, but you could have taken that to the Washington Post, perhaps. I don't know. Before I say too much, I guess I'll check in on it. I don't know. Well, it looks like it might be one of those USA Today owned sites. Anyway, former FBI agent. Political attacks on federal law enforcement are perilous for America. A July 3rd, 2018 piece. Might be worth it reading all on its own one day. But for now, let's continue with Andrew Weiss's retelling of things here. Back to the filing, he says, it explains the strategic rationale behind Moscow's efforts to penetrate U.S. political circles and conduct influence operations. That does sound like it might be of interest. DOJ's concerns are non-trivial and go to the heart of the Kremlin's activities and targeting of the Trump team in 2015 through 2017. He includes a screen grab from the filing here that is highlighted to read, Russia has long targeted the United States and U.S. allies in an effort to expand Russia's sphere of influence and relative strength. As is demonstrated by the attached declaration, the activities at issue in this case are a part of Russia's broader scheme to acquire information and establish relationships and communications channels that can be exploited to the Russian Federation's benefit. That's pretty general and probably expected of almost all Russian activity anywhere. But again, in light particularly of what we were reading before, the transcript of the discussion among the Republican leaders in the House, again, it's just basically a counterintelligence officer confirming, yes, I have seen such things as well. DOJ, Andrew Weiss continues, stresses that Butina's activities bear the hallmarks of a spot and assess operation. I don't think I could distinguish for you what all these different operations are by the names that they hung on them, but at least we know which one they're talking about. A spot and assess operation. While completely innocuous in other contexts, access agents play a key role for foreign intelligence services in the conduct of influence operations. Access agents may or may not be witting, and may be somewhat witting about the intent behind the foreign government's taskings. DOJ explains why the fact that Butina didn't act like a covert intelligence operative is actually beside the point. And here another screen grab, which reads, acquiring information, this is under spotting and assessing, acquiring information valuable to a foreign power does not necessarily involve collecting classified documents or engaging in cloak and dagger activities. Something as basic as the identification of people who have the ability to influence policy in a foreign power's favor is extremely attractive to those powers. This identification could form the basis of other forms of intelligence operations or targeting in the future. DOJ explains why Trump world's enthusiasm for back channels, and don't forget, it's an enthusiasm. For back channels, was so reckless and ripe for exploitation. This is why the enthusiasm for back channels was so reckless. Such channels bypass open channels of diplomacy and can be used to win concessions or influence positions that contradict declared official policies articulated by governments. Per DOJ, there was nothing clownish about the activities of Butina and her Moscow-based supervisor, Nikolai Torshin. Ditto for Veselnitskaya, remember her? In the Trump Tower meeting. It also doesn't matter if these people were freelancers who simply scored meetings with big-name figures. Think for a moment about everyone in the Mueller report who had unusual contacts with Russians or sketchy figures or knowledge thereof. It's a very long list. Trump, Don Jr., Ivanka, Kushner, Mike Flynn, Manafort, Cohen, Bannon, Eric Prince, Roger Stone, just to name a few. The DOJ damage assessment is grim. These types of interactions created a reservoir of information about vulnerabilities that, Anderson explains, is of substantial intelligence value to the Russian government, and Russian intelligence services will be able to use this information for years to come in their efforts to spot and assess Americans who may be susceptible to recruitment as foreign intelligence assets. Anderson is scathing about the impact of back-channel amateur hour, which can create commensurate harm to the U.S., including harm to the integrity of the U.S.'s political processes and internal government dealings, as well as to U.S. foreign policy interests and national security. Seen against this backdrop, it's clear that the conduct outlined in Volume 1 of the Mueller report created enormous damage to U.S. national security. Recall that none of what Mueller covers in the CI investigation requires mustering proof of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. But, as Anderson explains, Russia's efforts targeting the United States take a myriad of forms. It is, in essence, a numbers game. Not every intelligence campaign needs to be successful for Russia to have achieved its goals. And that is the end of this particular thread. I was reminded not only of the Butina case, since we had brought it up yesterday, but also of the transcript mentioned before that makes it plain that Republican leadership knew what was going on and what the scope really was and what the aim really was. And 3, it reminds me of, now that it's back in the news, of the defiance of the subpoena that we just read about in the investigation into security clearances. And, I mean, Kushner being one of the guys who ended up with a faked up security clearance on the president's orders was, of course, one of the early enthusiasts of back channel communications with the Russians. And that's problematic all by itself. And I was thinking this when I first read this thing yesterday, the next president, and I guess presumably the next Democratic president, because the next Republican president might not do it. And it might, if things go well, the next Republican president would be Mike Pence. I mean, that's actually relatively well when you compare continuing under Trump to that alternative. But the next president really is going to have to revoke all the security clearances granted under the Trump administration, including that for President Trump, who, remember, he remains eligible for national security briefings as an ex-president later on. I mean, so imagine him thinking, well, my oath to the Constitution, which I served so faithfully, my oath to the Constitution is over, and I can still get the briefings, so I can sell the information that I get in the briefings, and it won't be a crime. Now, that's a total misunderstanding of everything, but, he's very dumb. So that may, end up being the case. But the Russians might just continue going to Trump for information even after he's president. You got to do something about this. You got to plug that leak. You can't allow Trump, Kushner, and others to be running around with security clearances after they're out of office, whenever it happens. So let me just, throw that out there as a possibility. Now, I wish I had handy maybe I'll have to take a look, literally have to take a look at yesterday's summary and see if maybe the easier thing to do would be see if I emailed it to Scott, or was reading through my own summary or his summary of my show from yesterday. Gonna call this out. Did we get to it? I think we mentioned it at the end of the show, but may not. I don't know. We may not have gotten to that. It may have been, I think it came up in our discussion of the Seychelles meeting. And so maybe we ought to go back and read all the way through that piece, since we kind of cut it off after simply mentioning the fact that the meeting had taken place and that there was more evidence in the Mueller report that it was pre-planned and premeditated, and that Bannon had a role in it, and that they had all deleted all the evidence, so that we should be calling on foreign countries that if they're listening, if they could please find the text messages between Eric Prince and Steve Bannon, we would really appreciate it. I made the call for that over the weekend because that's no longer illegal, as you know. Rudy Giuliani cleared me on that. And so I figured there are a number of foreign intelligence services that might have that information or would have the capability of getting that information. So we might as well choose someplace nice and just tell them we'll come by and save you the shipping costs on getting that information to us. So like I figured I love Iceland. So if you're listening, by all means, please get those text messages and then let me know that you've got them and I'll come by and pick them up. Likewise, Tahiti, you are on notice. Anywhere else that we'd like to go to, some nice destinations, give me your suggestions and we can see if their governments are listening and they can recover this information. All right. So yesterday we started in on the Daily Beast's exclusive report, thanks to Aaron Banco and Betsy Woodruff, that it's now revealed what Eric Prince and Moscow's money man discussed in that infamous Seychelles meeting. I'm not sure how it's exclusive because I thought that this information was developed by the Mueller report, but perhaps I misunderstand these things. And remember, of course, that looming over all this, there is technically a denial from the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund administered by Dmitriev. What was his first name? Kirill Dmitriev, and from Dmitriev himself. So it is open to some question, but let's see. Where do we leave off? There was, first of all, the... oh, yes, right. We had briefly mentioned that there were 5 points discussed as between the two parties to this another back channel communication, and that at least the last one of which was quite concerning because it appeared to outline plans for one thing, more back channel communication, but given an official imprimatur once Trump becomes president, as we discussed, in the past and reminded everybody yesterday, to make political union, even overt political union with Russia, a foreign policy goal is, I suppose, the prerogative of the President of the United States, although you would think, in the interim, when he's still working on completing this political union and we have an opportunity to object to it, we might have a basis to complain about it because it has been conducted in secret and not as an open agenda item about which, for instance, we might let the voters decide. But just more illustration of how difficult it is to figure out what it is the voters are deciding. So, side note, it's not a very good idea for clarifying the issue of removing Trump from office, whether through impeachment or other means. Okay, so let's take a look at this information here. Robert Mueller has been looking into this meeting as part of his larger investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. And nearly a year after the meeting, Prince told Congress that it was just this thing that took place almost by accident, a meeting over a beer, which just happenstance. I just happened to be in the Seychelles at the same time as this Dmitriev guy and also Mr. Bonesaw and George Nader. We all just showed up in the Seychelles for no real reason. Since Prince's testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, Mueller's team has received information that the meeting was pre-organized and set up as a back channel between the Trump administration and the Kremlin, according to the Washington Post. Still, the exact details of the conversation between Prince and Dmitriev in the Seychelles have remained murky, but a memo Dmitriev is alleged to have sent after the meeting, described here for the first time, though denied by Dmitriev, sheds new light on the conversation and indicates it addressed some of the thorniest diplomatic challenges facing the United States and Russia. There is, of course, the fact that Dmitriev is CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, a sanctioned organization, but we are reminded that it is not illegal to do business with or meet with Dmitriev or the RDIF all by itself. It's just, I guess, certain activities might be illegal, but I guess arranging for their investment in the United States would pose a problem. But I guess meeting with them doesn't. All right, where were we? Oh, yes, right. Jim Himes asking the question, why Eric Prince and why Dmitriev? And why did that meeting happen? Conversations like that happen at the Aspen Institute every single day, but this is obviously something different. This is a hush-hush meeting in the Seychelles that at least one of the participants has been a little bit fuzzy about. That's really hedging your bet there. A few days after the Seychelles meeting, while at the Davos World Economic Forum, Dmitriev sent out the 2-page memo summarizing portions of his Seychelles conversation. The memo, which the Daily Beast reviewed, lists 4 potential areas of cooperation and calls for an action plan to improve U.S.-Russian relations over the next 12 months. I said 5, I think, earlier, but I guess it's 4. And then, of course, this nice catch-all phrase of a call for action, for an action plan to improve U.S.-Russian relations over the next 12 months. And I guess it depends who you ask the question of. How would you improve U.S.-Russian relations? Like, a normal candidate might have some specific plans. Well, I think there are certain areas that we could cooperate on, certain work we could do together, sure. I mean, another valid answer in the universe of all answers, I mean, if the President of the United States, in our system, if he answers, well, the way I plan to improve U.S.-Russian relations is I'll just do everything Russia wants whenever they ask me, whenever. That will improve our relations with with Russia. Russia will love us for it. And I guess I would have to say, yeah, I mean, in terms of making Russia love us, if that's a goal, and I guess if you decided that you wanted it to be one, and you could, I think we should maybe impeach you and make sure that you don't, but okay. That's a valid approach, I guess. I mean, most Americans ordinarily would reject it out of hand because it's not a good relationship for us to be in, where we make ourselves subservient to the mobster rule in Russia. But Trump would benefit greatly from it, and he thinks maybe it's terrific, and he's under the impression that he's how he thinks of Putin. He's a strong leader. It doesn't matter that he's insane or a mobster. He's a strong leader, and I'm just going to follow him, and that will improve our relationships. It will, from the Russian perspective, it'll be unhealthy for us. The first bullet point in the memo, and we'll get to a few of these and then take our break again and come back to it. There's Butina's face. No wonder I saw this or made me jump to her case. The first bullet point proposes the U.S. and Russia work together on military coordination and joint actions in Syria against ISIS. It's an idea that appealed to some of the most important players in the early Trump administration. Mike Flynn, the famous spy, Trump's first and famously Kremlin-friendly national security advisor, pushed to expand U.S.-Russian military communications in Syria, a move that may have been illegal. Oh, too bad. And there is a link as to why it might be illegal. Another Daily Beast story you can read for yourself. Dmitriev's plan, though, would have gone several steps further, beyond the illegality, I guess. The idea, according to the memo, was to set up a joint special forces mission where together the U.S. and Russia take out key ISIS person, that's what it says, or place, or freeze an area, then announces it after. Prince, for his part, has publicly supported the prospect of closer U.S.-Russia cooperation on counterterror. He figures he can hire out some of his mercenaries to the effort. If Franklin Roosevelt can work with Joseph Stalin to defeat German fascism, Nazi fascism, National Socialist fascism, hastens to remind us, then certainly Donald Trump can work with Putin to defeat Islamic fascism. Prince told the Daily Beast in June. That is a facile comparison, but what do you expect from him? The document also suggests the countries resume intelligence sharing on terrorism in the country, in Syria, I assume, and work together on a large-scale humanitarian effort to build hospitals in rebel areas and fly in medical supplies and food. That sounds nice enough. Although intelligence sharing with the Russians, I'd try to avoid it if I could. Second, the memo proposes a serious joint effort by U.S. and Russia to actively address the threat of nuclear, biological, and chemical, or WMD, terror. While Trump, during the campaign and in the White House, talked of rebuilding America's nuclear stockpile, and Putin rattled his saber too, well, the memo recommends they work together on non-proliferation. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Wow, I'm distracted by another story here. Let me just, in fact, if you're listening live, you'll see me tweeting about it. And do I jump away and deal with it? No, I should, but let me continue on just for the sake of continuity here. Just as we were heading into the break, I may not have gotten all of the message in there before we cut out, but yes, while Trump during the campaign and in the White House talked of rebuilding America's nuclear stockpile, Putin's done something similar. The memo recommends the two countries work together on nuclear non-proliferation, not proliferation. But, okay, that's sort of backwards. But again, could it be the president's prerogative to say we really should be building more nukes and doing something else instead? Or could he promise, if he thinks it's politically popular, to run on building more nukes, but then get into office and just say, let's do non-proliferation instead? Sure, he could, but you hope that that's done out in the open and on the up and up and without secret back channel. This is where the secret back channel stuff becomes really problematic. Is a certain amount of our diplomacy really has to be public facing. You can't simply waltz into office. I mean, you could make the argument that you have the power to do that, and maybe even constitutionally you'd win, depending on who you came before. But the idea that you can campaign on what was it, America First, and then say, yeah, my real agenda was political union with the Russians, making us subservient to them. Oh, well, I wish you had said that. I might not have agreed. Okay. Second, I'm sorry, I may have jumped back here. One potential venue for this non-proliferation idea is the Nuclear Threat Initiative, or NTI, which Warren Buffett is the primary sponsor of, the memo says. The Nuclear Threat Initiative, whose CEO is now former U.S. Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz. Remember him? The NTI is a Washington nonprofit that works to reduce the risk of WMD attacks. Over the years, it has sponsored dialogues between American and Russian diplomats, and last year, with a $50 million donation from Buffett, it set up a bank to purchase low-enriched uranium in the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan. Okay. Third, the memo proposes ways the U.S. and Russia can develop win-win economic investment initiatives that will be supported by both electorates. I don't know how much the electorate in Russia actually matters, but I guess they want to keep up appearances. Who knows how much it matters in our own country, for that matter. All right, so the U.S. and Russia can develop win-win economic investment initiatives that will be supported by both electorates, whether they're legal or not. Understanding U.S. production by foreign companies is a focus of the new administration, the memo says. It goes on to note that Russian companies would, quote, make investments with RDIF financing. And just a Russian development, what was it, international fund? Or this was the still sanctioned economic sovereign wealth investment fund run by Dmitriev here. They're sanctioned, but here's a memo that says, what about letting RDIF, the sanctioned company, invest in the U.S. market in the Midwest, let's say, creating real jobs for hard-hit area, that's what it says, with high unemployment. Or, well, it says high employment, but I assume they mean high unemployment. Once again here, a very interesting thought that, I don't know if you have to be a political insider from the Russian side. Would a Russian observer be able to know all on their own without any insider information being provided to them by American sources that a good way to exploit political divisions in the country would be to say, well, or to say at the very least, whether you're exploiting divisions or not, how do we make Americans like Russians? And one way would be, what if the Russian sovereign wealth funds invested in the United States and created jobs in the areas we understand from reading American newspapers where they really need them? And then people who would object, yeah, but it's the Russians, would have the rejoinder, yeah, but we're getting jobs, and that's what we really care about. And besides, Russia's our friend now, as they chanted in Charlottesville among the Nazis. So it would be okay. This would, of course, require, I don't know, getting the Trump administration to say, consider, I don't know. I mean, is this even a serious issue to bring up? I don't know. Maybe you probably never heard of Russians ever asking for this, but it would require American government to lift its sanctions against various Russian entities, including the RDIF. So I don't think anybody has ever broached this subject with you before, lifting sanctions, although it does sound vaguely familiar. Don't you think? So the Seychelles meeting, once again, about lifting sanctions on Russia so that they can waltz in and invest in, here they say, the Midwest, creating real jobs for hard-hit areas with, I assume they mean high unemployment. Almost as if, let's say, a Russian aluminum magnate might be interested in not necessarily the Midwest that we tend to bring to mind when we say the word, meaning like Ohio, upper Midwest, but rather Kentucky, which is actually, right down there below it. Let's say, for instance, we invested heavily in an aluminum manufacturing concern there and created jobs in, let's say, the constituency of Mitch McConnell, who might be in a position to help us out with other policy areas. Would that be a good idea? Sure, let's write it down and put it in the memo. Trump spent his presidential campaign pledging to bring back jobs to blighted Rust Belt towns, notching wins in Midwestern Democratic strongholds like Wisconsin and Michigan, and even making Minnesota competitive. The memo is evidence that Russia was listening. Russia, are you listening? Yes, we are. And proposing a way to help make Trump's central campaign promise come true. Except with RDIF funds, which would be great, a win-win for both of us. You win because we give you the investment. We win because we're able to make the investment because sanctions have been lifted / adoptions enabled. The document also sets out the idea of a joint RDIF fund with OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation that we have here in the United States. RDIF joint fund with OPIC to support U.S. investment in Russia to make U.S. businesses competitive versus subsidized Chinese businesses in Russia. OPIC, also known as the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, is a government agency that works with the private sector to help U.S. businesses gain a foothold in emerging markets. The memo also suggests organizing a business trip to Moscow, wow, great idea, for Washington politicos to highlight U.S. businesses' success in Russia. We can't just tell you about it. We need you to be here in our hotel rooms that are bugged, where we can watch you discuss our having told you about it, and maybe something else as well. Fourth, the memo says the U.S. and Russia should have an honest and open and continual dialogue on differences and concerns, which sounds like a good idea also. One of those concerns, the memo says, is resolving the Ukraine crisis, instigated by Russia's invasion and annexation of Crimea in 2014, through Minsk agreements and ensuring Ukraine fulfills its commitments, unquote. That is the mechanism by which they suggest resolving the Ukraine crisis. We'll have an open dialogue with the United States about how Ukraine has to fulfill its commitments. Stupid bastards. They're all at fault here. The Minsk agreements were drafted and signed by warring parties to alleviate the conflict in Ukraine. The memo also says the two countries should coordinate a working group between the State Department and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to address key differences. Sure, right? Should do that all the time. It is unclear from the memo what those differences are. And last, the memo proposes the U.S. and Russia set up a small working group with, let's say, 2 to 3 people from each side, authorized to finalize an action plan for a major improvement in the U.S.-Russia relationship, and proposes coordination across major agencies and government bodies to achieve tangible impact in the next 9 to 12 months. Ambitious goals, and why not have a working group to make sure things work smoothly? 2 to 3 people from each side. Let's say Jared Kushner, maybe Eric Prince, and Paul Manafort from your side, and or if you want to throw in Don Jr., I guess we'd accept him too. And we'll bring 2 to 3 people too, and but the people need to be authorized to finalize an action plan for a major improvement in the U.S.-Russia relationship. In other words, you got to be willing to lift sanctions and accept our sovereign wealth fund investments in key infrastructure in the United States. What could go wrong with the sovereign wealth fund, the government-owned investment bank in Russia, owning swaths of key heavy industry manufacturing concerns in the United States, in key pressure points where you've got to keep it. If you can keep the people employed there, they'll be on the side of the administration that agrees to strike this deal. And if that investment is ever threatened, it would be a real worry for the incumbent administration that depends on those regions for its political support. So watch out. Make sure you do my bidding. I guess it's a great plan for when you have a non-dotard president who can't simply be told, do this thing and you'll become rich, but somebody who actually has, perhaps some loyalty to the United States or some integrity or some understanding of what's happening around him at any given time, who might otherwise resist. Well, these are the states that delivered the presidency to you, thanks to the roadmap we were handed by Paul Manafort. You want to keep it? Then you better get out of the way and make sure that it's A-okay with everybody to have the Russians own all your heavy industry. Not that that will ever create a problem for you, so don't worry. Evelyn Farkas, an Obama administration Pentagon official who focused on Eastern Europe and Russia, said the proposals in the memo aren't unusual. In fact, they mirror proposals that Moscow makes regularly. And so, does that put you at ease? It might. It's nothing new, she told the Daily Beast. What is new is that they're trying to do this through this weird back channel. That is new and interesting. That's true. There's more, though. The proposal of the task force, though, the memo's 5th point, I knew there were 5, caught the eye of Mike Aoyang. No idea how I'm doing with that name. But Mike is vice president of the think tank Third Way's National Security Program and a former House Intelligence Committee staffer. And here's what she's got to say here. Number 5, that there's a task force where the Russians are going to participate in figuring out what the policy should be on numbers 1 through 4. That's really not normal, she told the Daily Beast. They call it shuttle diplomacy for a reason. There's a back and forth on it, but you're not letting them inside your decision-making loop. That's what's different about this strange, semi-secret, unaccountable, perhaps, group of 2 to 3 from each side, so long as the 2 to 3 are authorized to make final decisions about major policy initiatives so that nobody else has to hear about it. It doesn't have to go to Congress. You just do it. So what's the problem with a joint U.S.-Russian Star Chamber foreign policy committee accountable to no one? Nothing, right? Especially if Russia holds all the cards in the end. Be perfect for them. We have no problem with that here in the United States because we're putting America first. The memo was also sent to Richard Gerson, head of Falcon Edge Capital, a hedge fund in New York City. Why? I'm not sure. A representative for Gerson said he was in the Seychelles the week of the Prince Dmitriev meeting, but left the island before it took place. The representative declined to comment on the memo. That sounds strange, maybe not entirely likely. One Obama-era State Department official who requested anonymity because of political sensitivities said all the priorities laid out in the memo would be typical for two countries with normal relations, but he added that he was astounded this pitch was made in the wake of Russia's 2016 election meddling. It's breathtaking, he said. In fact, I guess I would say it's the sort of thing that Russia could only believe the Trump administration wouldn't be offended by. Because they're in the business of denying that the election meddling took place. Himes put it this way: this just feels to me like one more of the half-dozen examples of Russians sticking their tentacles out to see what kind of relationships they might build and what kind of influence they might have. That might be the best explanation for what's going on, but they have real reason, it seems, to hope that the Trump administration would be willing to fall for this, essentially. And they might, because if there's money in it for Trump, he's likely to take it. All right, well, that's where we stand. By the way, here's the article that I was thinking of that had the government's request for an 18-month sentence for Maria Butina. And I guess that's what I thought we might share. I don't know whether that really overlaps as well with the other tweet thread that we read about the filing in her case. But let's see. It doesn't look like a terribly long piece. Perhaps we should scan through it and see if there's anything else we can tease out of it. Government wants 18-month sentence for Russian agent Maria Butina. Tracy Connor writes for the Daily Beast. In memos filed Friday night, see, they're referring to the same papers, the government and defense attorneys presented dueling sketches of the gun-slinging Russian who cozied up to powerful American conservatives. I think the dueling... what did they say? Dueling sketches might be of interest too. You know, you can, if you're willing to see things a certain way, you could see how no collusion. Federal prosecutors are asking a judge to give Butina 18 months in prison, while her lawyers are pushing for a sentence of time served so she can return to her homeland and, quote, start life anew, just like Anna Chapman did, I guess, right? In sentencing memos filed Friday night, the government and defense attorneys presented dueling sketches of the gun-slinging, flame-haired Russian who cozied up to powerful American conservatives. She pleaded guilty in December to conspiring to violate laws prohibiting covert foreign agents and promised to cooperate with American law enforcement. She's scheduled to be sentenced April 26th, so that's coming right up. Prosecutors described her as a politically savvy schemer who sought to advance Russian interests and establish a back channel, there it is again, between Moscow and influential figures in Washington. Butina was not a spy in the traditional sense of trying to gain access to classified information to send back to her home country. She was not a trained intelligence officer, they wrote, but the actions she took were nonetheless taken on behalf of the Russian official, the Russian official, for the benefit of the Russian Federation, and those actions had the potential to damage the national security of the United States. Her lawyers, by contrast, portrayed her as a naive country girl who came to the United States for love and opportunity and made a basic bureaucratic mistake, failing to register as a foreign agent while she reported back to a former Russian official, Alexander Torshin, about her activities. Wasn't he previously referred to as Nikolai Torshin in the other article? That might just be a mistake. I do remember that. I thought it was Alexander. But okay. They described how she started and built a gun rights organization, made contact with the National Rifle Association, started a romance with Republican operative Paul Erickson, and then moved to the U.S., where she admittedly did Torshin's bidding. If given a chance, she would have done things differently, her attorneys wrote. And that's not even really all that convincing, is it? She's just a country girl who made one bureaucratic mistake. She failed to register as a foreign agent, given that she was a country girl who decided to start a Russian NRA, move to the United States, start dating a Republican operative, and then pass information back to Russian intelligence operatives. So really, it's just that she didn't know. As a country girl, the kind of country girl who, through no fault of her own, or perhaps driven to it by farmersonly.com, love connection, something like that. I didn't know when I started out as a country girl moving to the United States and starting a gun rights organization that I was going at the orders of a Russian official. I didn't know that this was going to make me a foreign agent. I'm just a country girl who works as a spy. But I didn't know that I had to file spy paperwork. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't float with me. But okay. If given a chance, though, she would have done things differently, her attorneys wrote. But, they added, all told, her motivations weren't nefarious. Maria was genuinely interested in improving relations between the two countries, and she had no ill intent. Additionally, if Torshin happened to share any of her unsolicited notes or political thoughts up the chain, she didn't know, although she would welcome any recognition all the same. The attorneys said that Butina has fully cooperated with the U.S. investigation, turning over thousands of documents to a Senate committee, answering the committee's questions for 8 hours, and sitting for interviews with federal investigators before and after her guilty plea. They asked the judge to give her a sentence of no more than 6 months, since she'd been jailed for 9. That would amount to a sentence of time served, along with a one-way ticket to Russia. Prosecutors acknowledged Butina's cooperation and said they were willing to cut her a break, asking for a 6-month downward departure in sentence. Instead of the 24 months called for in the guidelines, they argued she should get 18. Butina's work involved building a Rolodex of and information about powerful people. Sounds like one of those 3 operations that we were told about before. Information about powerful people who had or were likely to get access to and influence over the next presidential administration, the U.S. Attorney's Office wrote. Butina's reports back to the Russian official on the people she was meeting have all the hallmarks of spotting and assessing reports. The value of this information to the Russian Federation is immense. Butina's memo included a sheaf of character references, including one from George O'Neill, the Rockefeller heir and conservative writer who reportedly hosted a U.S.-Russian friendship dinner at her behest in 2017. They didn't do it at Mar-a-Lago, as far as I know. That's where the Chinese-American friendship dinners are happening. So they're fully booked. He called her a delightful and idealistic young soul and suggested that her efforts at diplomacy might not be over. I expect with the spiritual strength gained from this painful and unhappy episode in her life, she can continue working to enable peaceful answers to some of her vexing international problems, he wrote. Those vexing problems. Well, it's very tough. And again, if you want to cloak it in the disguise of, no, this is legitimate U.S. foreign policy here. We want to become closer to Russia in order to resolve our differences. In other words, by dissolving ourselves and marrying ourselves to them in policy up and down the line, that is a method of growing closer to and eliminating problems between our two countries. But it's not the one that most people had in mind when they signed up for it or even when they lost. And I signed up with her, not with you, but okay, still, you're going to conduct foreign policy, but it's supposed to keep Russia as foreign policy, not domestic policy. We're not adopting their domestic policy as our own. But Trump says different. Okay, well, let's see. What I had put aside earlier, maybe we can share in a few minutes that we have before closing things out for the day. Greg Sargent had chimed in again with more information on the ongoing dissection of the Mueller report. Trump is privately worried, he says, that Don McGahn's testimony could lead to his impeachment. A new report says, of course, another thing he told the reporters on camera yesterday, I'm not even, are you worried about impeachment? Not even a little bit. Sure. Okay. Well, you know how to interpret that. You know how to read a Trump comment, right? That's a key tell, Greg says. Trump is trying to close down oversight everywhere, but his power to do this isn't limitless. And that makes him angry. He's got a new piece on it. I guess, let's see. We'll take a look at the title of it anyway. Why is Trump raging again? Because Don McGahn will further expose his corruption. I look forward to that. But instead, let's close out with this tidbit, because that one deserves more attention. This one I think we can handle pretty quickly. Just matching up with another story we had the other day of, did I mention that I think the sixth episode of a school resource officer accidentally discharging his weapon in school since 1214 incident in Newtown, when it became wildly popular to place armed school resource officers in schools around the country. It had already been underway, but that's when I started to watch the gun fail stories. And so there you have it. It was the other day we had number 6, as by my count, of strictly, it had to be a school resource officer in school discharging a weapon. So 6 times, it's running 6-0 in terms of the number of school shootings stopped by armed school resource officers versus the number of times they've accidentally fired those weapons while waiting for that attack to take place at their particular school. That's basically what the numbers would have told you was going to happen. Well, there's been another one, except it wasn't a school resource officer. I don't know who it was. I am sent this notice here from, let's see, who sent me this? I better open this up. Warfare Class, Employee of the Month, Warfare_Class sends me this link from the Madison, Wisconsin papers. And I guess I better get to it quickly. Milwaukee Catholic school employee, of what nature I do not know, accidentally fires gun, injures student. So another armed employee who brought their gun to school for whatever reason, authorized or not, has accidentally fired it and grazed a 10-year-old student. And just so you can really get excited about it, remember this happened in a Catholic school. They didn't tell the cops for 2 weeks. How the hell do you like that? School officials, by the way, do tell us that the employee who brought the gun to school has been fired. So is the gun, of course, but it's too late for that. I don't know under what circumstances the gun was brought to school. I don't know if the person was authorized, unauthorized. How do you like that, though? But just amazing that you would do such a thing, and because your first concern is transparency and safety and blah, blah, blah. How do you like this? There was a school shooting, ladies and gentlemen, and they didn't even bother to tell the cops about it for 2 weeks. Why? Because the employee who brought his gun to school to stop a school shooting became the school shooter. Also equally predictable. And by the way, I don't rule out the possibility one day of someone who authorized or otherwise, and I guess it really doesn't matter to gun people, honestly. I mean, the people who do this stuff, bringing their guns to school, authorized or unauthorized. I mean, there are school districts that allow certain teachers to be armed, but I believe, we've read stories that there are basically people who, I'm guessing that their thinking was, well, I want to be armed, but I'm not authorized to be armed, but I want to be, and I should be able to be because Second Amendment, and I'm not going to be the sucker who's here unarmed when a school shooter comes in. So I'm going to bring my weapon to school regardless. And then boom, something goes wrong with it, or they get discovered with it, or something else happens, and they can't understand why they're being held accountable. But I still think that there's a possibility that somebody who would bring their weapon to school authorized might one day become a school shooter, and not by accident, but intentionally. and just say, I've had enough. And they didn't screen my psychological state carefully enough before allowing to authorize me to carry a gun, and I've had it, and I'm going to start shooting. That's still a possibility, but in the meantime, it's the accidents that are getting to us, and I think this is probably the second or third time that I've seen armed security of some kind, authorized or not, accidentally shoot students in U.S. schools. So yeah, it's happening. Just thought I'd make you aware of it. What else is happening? Well, that'll be Justice Putnam's job to tell you. He comes up next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we can scan and see what he's got here. Let's see. Rudy Giuliani's My Cousin Vinny shtick is a reminder of the lawlessness of this administration. Got lots more stories, too, which I'll bring you after this short announcement. See what I can summarize next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Wow, more news on that anti-immigrant vigilante militia that kidnapped, I didn't even know, over 5,600 asylum seekers over a 2-month period at the border, also plotting to assassinate Hillary Clinton, George Soros, by the way, just in case you wanted to know. Does anybody know what happened to the people that they actually kidnapped? Are they trafficking them? Anybody? We'll check it next.